Digibro here. I can finally stand on two legs again, and today I'm going to tell you about my top 10 favorite anime right now. Not so much of all time, because I've watched a lot of anime over the years, and there's a lot of shows that I really loved that I haven't seen in a few years, and it's really hard for me to consider those favorites at the moment because my opinions change so often. I'll watch a show again, feel totally different about it than what I did before, so I don't really feel comfortable putting shows as favorites or giving them scores if I'm not sure that I know how I feel about that show. Now, if you go onto my anime list, you'll see that I've only given scores to shows that I've watched in the past year or so, shows that I've watched recently enough to be sure how I feel about them, because of the fact that I didn't used to give scores, so now I'm only starting it now. And as such, the shows that'll be on this list are only going to be shows that I have watched within that time frame, recently enough that I'm sure they should be in my top 10. So is this an absolute top 10 of all my favorite anime ever made? Not exactly. Cowboy Bebop might make this list in the future. Neon Genesis Evangelion should definitely be on here. Revolutionary Girl Utena, Steins Gate, all of these are shows that I could easily imagine being in my top 10, but none of them are on here because I haven't seen them in a long time, and I can't be totally sure. Without further ado, I will dive into the 10 shows that right now I feel are appropriate to be on my top 10 list, and in the future, probably in either 6 months or in 1 year, depending on how much things change as I go ahead, I will update this list with whatever it is at that time. So, number 10, Space Dandy, the latest addition to my favorites list. Space Dandy is just this really fun, exciting, adventurous show that breaks a lot of new ground. It shows me things that I've never seen in anime before. Even though a lot of the episodes are callbacks to old styles, old shows, it brings fresh life to those callbacks, and then other episodes are just totally out there. It's like it's calling back to the future. It's crazy. You never know what you're gonna get out of a Space Dandy episode. All of them are exciting. They trick you. They make you think, what am I watching? And then you find out what you're watching and you're excited because it was something cool. There's a lot of deep messages in the show, a lot of symbolism, a lot of things that were obviously put in to make you think a little harder about what you're seeing and to make you appreciate it as expressive. The show feels intensely expressive. It's a show that has tons of massively creative individuals. Some of the best veterans of anime and some newbies who are like just getting their first legs as directors, putting out amazing content in Space Dandy. I really think that Space Dandy represents progress in the field of animation. It's exciting to watch because of that, and just because it's a fun, good show. I've got a bunch of videos on it already, so go check those out if you haven't seen them yet. After that, number 9, Kill La Kill. I like this for a lot of the same reasons I like Space Dandy. It's just a fun, action-filled romp that's really expressive in its animation, and oh my god, the animation in this show is everywhere. It's all over the place, but all of it's a blast. The design sense is phenomenal in this show. The soundtrack, the way that the soundtrack interacts with the scenes is fantastic. The whole thing is incredibly well put together. The problem with Kill La Kill is that the first time you watch it, you don't know where it's going. It kind of feels like a clusterfuck, especially in the teen episodes where this plot doesn't really seem to be moving forward, and there's a lot of scenes that you're like, is this necessary? But when you go back and watch it again, and you already know what you're gonna get out of it, it doesn't really have that same problem, because almost every episode is fun. No matter what, it's fun to watch. So as long as you already are aware of the story, where it's going, what's going on, and then you watch it again, then you can just sit back and appreciate those scenes for what they are, which is really fun to watch action scenes that they obviously had a lot of care put into them. The show has tons and tons of symbolism and deeper allusions to other things, which once I started reading other people's analysis of Kill La Kill is really when I started to love the show, because when I first watched it I didn't really understand what it was going for thematically because it seemed so confusing, but then when I saw other people analyze the themes, like in some posts I'll link in the description, that's when it really opened up to me and I felt like I understood. And I've also made some videos on Kill La Kill as well, so you should check those out too. Number 8, Toradora, my favorite romance, love story, rom-com type of show. Toradora is a show about characters who are really entertaining to watch, at least to me personally. I loved the characters in Toradora, especially the main two, Ryuji and Taiga. The interactions between them are entertaining, but what really made the show special is that it's about how people sort of fill in the blanks in one another. It's about how people who are missing something can have that thing fulfilled by another person, and as all the friends and families come together in the show, then you get the sense that they sort of complete each other as individuals, and that growing up into adulthood is really about finding people and finding a way to live that completes who you are. I think that has a lot to do with my enjoyment of the series anyways, especially between the two main characters who perfectly complete one another in a way that's not corny, it's not cheesy. You always feel that it's realistic and it makes sense for the characters to act the way they do. There are episodes later in the show that are kind of weird, where it was like, why was this necessary? Some of the drama that springs up in the late teen episodes and early 20s. But overall, I think it's a fantastic love story. At number 7, I'm putting the Kara no Kyoukai films, the whole bundle of them, but especially number 7, number 5, and number 1 are my 3 favorites. Kara no Kyoukai is a tone piece more than anything. It's all about atmosphere. It's about feeling. First of all, one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, probably one of my top 5 or top 10, Yuki Kajiura's soundtrack for these films, especially the first one, is phenomenal. The animation and the feeling of these dark city landscapes just appeals to me perfectly. More than anything, what Kara no Kyoukai does is appeal to me specifically. It has a lot of my personal, like, things that I've always loved, things that as a teenager I was big into. Deep philosophical ideas, psychological ideas that are interesting to explore. I won't say it's the deepest show ever, and I won't say that the storyline is very good. The themes it presents are good, the atmosphere is good. The story and characters are sort of secondary to all that. They sort of just provide a backdrop for the atmosphere to really take hold and for the themes to take hold. But overall, I still really enjoy the show. Not as much as I did when I was younger, but I still think it's really fun to watch. Number 6, people are gonna hate me for this, because this is the worst anime ever, but it's Garzy's Wing. And the reason Garzy's Wing is on my list is that it is unfathomably bad, but in a way that is highly entertaining. And I don't just mean that in the sense of like watching it and groaning and going, oh god, this is so bad. It's really legitimately funny. Like, I've watched the first episode of Garzy's Wing countless times. I can recite half of it. It's in my blog title. My sword is unbelievably dull. Because there's all these like really memorable quotes, really memorable things about it. You have to watch it dubbed, by the way. You can't watch the sub version. The dub is hilarious. And it's so memorable and so interesting that it really is one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite viewing experiences of anime, especially to watch with people who haven't seen it yet, or to watch with friends who get the jokes as well, is just a blast. And I think it's a better comedy and entertainment experience than most anime that I've seen, so that's why it's still in here. At number 5, Log Horizon, a genius show about characters getting trapped inside of a video game, but instead of wondering about the big mystery of how they got there or the big mystery of how do we get out, the question is, what is this world and how do we live in it? How do we form a society inside of a video game? How can we make life here? It uses the principles of video games in really inventive and interesting ways to build its world, where, say, like NPCs, for instance, don't see themselves as non-player characters. They have an AI, and they have the lore of the world that they live in. They believe in that because that's who they are. So the show then starts asking questions about, like, well, what does the lore from the game suggest about the mechanics of this world? How does this world operate? And by figuring that out and learning new things, the characters form an empire or a community rather, and are able to live and coexist inside this game. It's fascinating to watch. Lots of great economic principles going on, societal principles, likable characters, and big memorable moments like in episode 7 and I want to say 16. Just huge moments that really stick out. Must watch, I would say. Anyways, at number 4, Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex. I'm just grouping all of it into one. Standalone Complex is the most densely packed show that I've ever seen. It presents an entire society, like this post-singularity transhumanist world where people are, merging with machines, where technology kind of overtakes the globe, and it presents us with how this would affect society, how this would affect psychology, philosophy. What do these technological advances suggest about our world? What kind of problems and conflicts would arise from this world existing? And it uses the brilliant setup of having lots of episodes that stand alone, but all feed into one another in one big complex, and there's the overarching storylines, which are very exciting, extremely well written, that are fed into by the progress of the smaller stories. So it all just fleshes out and builds this amazing world. And as someone who's very interested in what the future will be like in the post-singularity world, it was just absolutely fascinating to watch. At number 3, I'm putting Psychopaths. Psychopaths is similar to Ghost in the Shell in that it builds a society, but it focuses less on the broad strokes of the society and more specifically on psychology. It's about how in a world where everyone's psychological state is being constantly monitored, and where the system can tell you more about yourself than what you even know about yourself, how does this affect society? And it focuses very squarely on that, but it fleshes out this concept extremely well. There's a lot of standalone episodes at the beginning that show you how the system affects the individual people and how it can drive certain people to madness, and then it evolves into this really big epic storyline. This one is full of big memorable moments, full of awesome quotes, awesome characters. Tsunemori Akane is one of my favorite characters in anime, partly because she's got like my favorite voice actress, Hanazawa Kana, and because she's adorable, and because she represents like everything that I believe in morally. And then there's all these other great characters, the villain Makishima, one of the most memorable villains in anime. So yeah, I just love Psychopaths a lot. I love the look of it, I love the feel of it, I love everything about it. Number 2, Ponyo on the Cliff by the Sea. This is the hardest one for me to explain because there is not a deep analytical reason for why I like Ponyo. It's just really bright and colorful and explosive and energetic and fun. It turns me into a child. When I watch this film, I'm literally like, oh my god, it's Ponyo! She's so adorable! That's what I sound like the whole movie. It triggers something in my brain that turns me into a child again. It's like the most whimsy I can feel. And there's nothing in it that turns off that part of my brain. Whereas with other shows, like if I were to go watch Pokemon right now, which I love Pokemon still, but I don't have that same childlike wonderment. I think about the pacing or the characters or something like that, or the dialogue. Ponyo doesn't have anything to break that immersion. It's just this magical journey, and it never stops being fun to watch, and I love it. Finally, my number 1 favorite anime of all time is K-On! I love this show so much. When I watched the second season back in 2010, it pretty much immediately became my favorite show. But it was funny because at the time, I only really liked season 2. I thought season 1 was just okay, and then season 2 blew me out of the water. This year, I've rewatched season 1, haven't gotten to the second one yet, and it blew my mind all over again. I realized that even in season 1, K-On! Was absolutely amazing. And the reason is that the characters in this show, first of all, it's got my favorite cast of characters ever. All 5 of the main characters are just the best characters in anime. Especially Yui and Ritsu, because both of them have the best vocal performances by a long shot that I've ever heard in a show. Their voice acting is just so next level in fleshing out these characters as real, believable people that it's hard for me to even think of it as like an anime that's written. It just feels like it's evolving and happening in real time. The way the characters progress throughout the show, you can't really appreciate it until you've seen the whole show. When you've seen it all, you know where these characters are going to go, where they end up in the end. And then when you go back and watch the first season, you realize how different they were. And because the process was so gradual, because it eases you into the characters, gets you to understand like how they are, how they work together, that by the time they've changed, it just seems natural. But then when you watch episode 1, you're like, wow, these characters weren't like what I remember in the beginning. And then in each episode, you see them changing. You understand how they got that way. It wasn't like they just changed because the writers changed or something. The characters had this very visible progression that happened before your eyes, yet somehow you never thought about it when you watched the show the first time. And then you go back and you see how in each episode they're introducing some new concept, some new way that the characters are changing, so that by the end, there's this beautiful, epic finale to the show where the last few episodes are like really fucking like make me cry every time. Even season 1 makes me cry now because I also relate to it. I have a lot of friends who remind me of characters from K-On!, so thinking about that just brings the extra level of fucking heart-grabbingness. Everything about the show is fantastic. It's super dense with things to love. The world feels super alive because they put so much detail into it. The background art is so detailed. The way the characters act, the way they move is so detailed that everything feels alive and lived in and real. And that's what makes K-On! my number one favorite anime. That's all for this list. I'll see you in 6 months or a year, however long it takes before I've got enough shows to justify updating this list.